China is tightening its grip on the country's Christians through repeated efforts to persecute and silence the church. Mark Martin joins us now in the CBN newsroom with an update on the persecution there and what a sister organization of CBN is doing to help. Mark?
Heather, Christians are being rounded up, imprisoned, and some even tortured for their faith. Church crosses are being removed. Government officials are burning Bibles and demolishing church buildings. It's an all-out campaign to eradicate the faith of Chinese who choose to follow Jesus Christ. The American Center for Law and Justice Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow wrote, churches have been forced to shut down. China has banned the online sale of the Bible as it works to rewrite the scriptures to include pro-government messaging. The ACLJ has launched a petition drive to fight for the freedom of one Christian pastor, John Chow, who Sekulow reports is behind bars in a crowded Chinese prison cell and has been in a Chinese prison for nearly 2 years. Sekulow wrote, after decades of peacefully serving the impoverished, providing much needed supplies and building schools in China and Myanmar, Pastor John, a U.S. permanent resident, was arrested and convicted of absurd charges. The chief counsel of the ACLJ calls Chow a victim of an anti-Christian campaign in China. Sekulow also reports that his organization is working on an international level to pressure China to stop the focused persecution of Christians, which includes setting Chow free. Heather.
All right, Mark, thank you. Oh, and I do want to ask you, though, what are other Christian leaders saying about religious persecution in China?
Good question. CBN News also reached out to Dr. Bob Fu, the founder and president of China Aid, who issued this statement to us. In 2018, President Xi's regime declared an all-out war against religious minorities, children's religious education, and the rule of law. With at least 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, thousands of churches shut down, hundreds of thousands of arbitrary detention of Christian believers, and long-time enforced disappearances of human rights lawyers such as Wang Quanzhang and Gao Zhizhang, Christian churches and human rights lawyers had entered the most chilling winter since the end of Chairman Mao's Cultural Revolution. Heather, back to you.
All right, Mark, thank you. The Trump administration is calling on leaders of perhaps its biggest base, evangelicals, to help in its battle with China, especially when it comes to religious persecution. CBN's Ephraim Graham spoke with our international reporter George Thomas for more on this important issue for not only Christians, but all people of faith.
George, we've been reporting on the crackdown by China's communist government on Christians and others. Just how bad is it?
It's been a very, very tough time. I mean, 2018 was horrendous for China's Christians. We saw hundreds of churches across the country shut down, pastors being arrested. It has been so tough. I mean, I've been covering China for the last 25 years, and we have documented in detail the incredible growth of Christianity, the wave of revival that's been gripping this nation for 25, 30 years. And suddenly, in the last 12 months, 24 months, this dramatic turnaround where the government with a very, very hard fist is coming down hard on Christians and other people of faith.
So Vice President Mike Pence has said that these are desperate times, referring to the situation for Christians in China. But you could say the same for Muslims and others as well, correct?
That's right. I mean, close to we don't know the exact numbers, but some of the estimates are that close to 1 million Muslims are being placed in these so-called internment camps. Basically, what the Chinese government wants to do is to force Muslims to stop embracing Islam and to embrace the Communist Party. They're trying to brainwash Muslims. So, for example, Muslims who every year they have 30 days of prayer called Ramadan. So they're trying to tell Muslims you're not allowed to engage in this month-long of fasting. They're telling men to stop growing their beards. They're telling women not to cover themselves. So we're looking at a systematic attempt by the government to tell people of faith, especially Christians and Muslims, that you can no longer continue to practice your faith the way you would like to.
How does this play out diplomatically with China as the United States works to make a trade deal with the country?
It makes it all the more complicated. I think what is different with this particular administration is that this administration is going after talking about issues of religious freedom that other administrations have not. They've never engaged in a public manner. I mean, the Vice President, Pence, other political leaders across the political aisle, Republicans and Democrats, have been pressing China on this issue of religious freedom. And so it makes the dialogue and the ongoing talks about trade all the more difficult because on one hand, the administration is out front on the issue of trade, but at the same time, behind the scenes, they're also criticizing the Chinese government for the way it's handling people of faith across the country.
How are evangelical leaders and political leaders responding?
Well, they're very encouraged with this particular administration because this administration has, from day one, talked about protecting religious freedom around the world. Those who suffer for their faith, Christians, Muslims, and others around the world. They focused in the first 2 years on the Middle East, the plight of Christians in the Middle East under persecution from Muslims. Now they're focusing on China and the level of crackdown on people of faith, especially Christians. But they also know that this past year, 2018, was, as I mentioned, very, very difficult. And so they have been out front on this issue, trying to engage the Chinese. Evangelical, Jewish, other leaders are saying to the Chinese government, listen, people of faith are not a threat to your nation. They love your nation. They love their country. And so do not be alarmed. Do not be afraid that somehow Christians, because they love God, suddenly are going to create a sort of a political uprising against the government.
Real quick, what is our responsibility as Christians in this?
Well, we need to pray, continue to pray for Christians in China, but also Muslims. Muslims are suffering, as I said, Buddhists, Taoists, atheists, other people of faith, not necessarily atheists, but other people of faith who are suffering for their belief. And so as Christians, we have got to stand up for not just our own fellow brethren, but also those of all faiths, because when you persecute one group, it's persecution against the entire nation.
Indeed it is. George Thomas, as always, thank you for your insight.
You're welcome.